Hello, this is Corey Edmund Engelot here with a reading. We're going to read a chapter from this book called Principles of Nature by Elihu Palmer. A lot of people do not know what this book is, but it's actually from 300 years ago, yes, in the 1700s, the 18th century. And this guy was a deist. I have a whole video talking about what deism is in case you've never heard of it. So this book goes over a lot about religion, particularly attacking a lot of religion, because that is what deism did back then. No, I'm not talking about atheism. I'm not talking about agnosticism or anything else. I'm talking about deism, right, which is studying the world, knowing God through nature and through natural law. Now, there's a section on here that I'm going to read. I mean, I don't see anything online of anybody doing any readings of this book. A lot of people, for the most part, are unaware of what this book is. So I'm going to read one chapter of it that goes over morality because, well, religion, a lot of people assume morals come from religions. But the deists say, no, that's not the case. We can understand morality through the laws of nature. And they prove it, not just through books like this. There's many other books just like this, and some of them use a lot of ridicule. They're attacking religion in every sort of way, every single thing they've ever done. And a lot of them encourage the use of reason, human reason, to understand the world around them. So we're just going to read a chapter here. I have a lot of parts bookmarked. This part is toward the end of the book, okay? The majority of the book is going over certain particular things about religion. But I love this chapter because it's called Moral Principle. Now again, this is called Principles of Nature by Elihu Palmer. This guy was, I believe, a best friend of Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. These guys are American founding fathers. Apparently also had a copy of this book and other books like Reason, the Only Oracle of Man. There's a lot of other deist books. This one's pretty highly acclaimed. So let's start reading this chapter called Moral Principle. In the sacred writings of the Jews and Christians, in all ancient and theological compositions, the idea of a correct and moral principle had been so frequently abandoned and so grossly violated that the energy of thought for many ages was inadequate to an upright and full investigation of the nature of human actions. This subject is, no doubt, connected with considerable difficulties, but these difficulties have been essentially augmented by the rubbish with which superstition has covered the moral character of man. The proofs of any inquiry which relate to moral principle adhere so closely to the realities of physical and intellectual existence that the errors of an upright and intelligent mind can never assume a frightful and destructive character. They will be continually modified and undergo frequent corrections by the new information of which the mind is continually susceptible. Moral science cannot, perhaps, be reduced to an absolute certitude or become susceptible of absolute perfection. It is in its nature progressive in the infinite diversity of sensations which constitute the essential basis of all our intellectual combinations and deductions will furnish at least a suspicion that the decisions of the mind upon this subject ought frequently to be re-examined and subjected to a new and more accurate scrutiny. All the theological systems that ever have been written have never thrown a particle of light upon this most interesting inquiry. They have established precepts, some few of which are good, and others extremely immoral. But no analysis of the physical or moral powers of man has ever been exhibited. No development of the principle of causation or the nature of those effects which have essentially resulted from the constitution of animal or intellectual existence. In all these cases, supernatural theology has prudently observed an absolute silence, probably from a consciousness of the most profound ignorance. This single truth of itself evinces the moral deficiency of supernatural religion, and the necessity of returning it to the basis of nature for a correct development of principle. Everything that is discordant to this has been established by the force of authority, and the reasonableness of such establishment has never been a ground for serious inquiry. If it should be objected that it is impossible, even upon the basis of nature, to find a universal standard of morality, it will, nevertheless, appear that a continual approach towards such a standard must be far preferable to those arbitrary decisions which theology has made upon this subject. There can be no internal force or excellence connected with a system established solely by external power, without reference to the essence or character of the principles which constitute the body of such a system. The internal excellence of the principle itself, together with capacity of mental discernment, is essential to the ultimate benefit which may be expected from the natural operation of legal codes. But there is no better method of rendering a principle intelligible than by showing that it is consistent with nature, that it has resulted from her laws, that it is useful in its effect, that it is capable of being reduced to practice, in a word, that is suited to the powers, condition, and character of the human species. There is another previous consideration also, which ought to be taken into the account before we shall be able to comprehend the essence of moral principle, or to understand the nature of those duties which result from our original constitutions. That intellectual part of man, which supernatural theology has denominated the soul, has been viewed separate and distinct from the body, as a kind of spiritual and celestial inhabitant of a mean and material tenement, that their union would be of short duration, and that their final destination was extremely different. This led to reasonings and conjectures that were erroneous, for as the corporal sensations were entirely excluded from a participation in the cause by which moral influence was produced, an accurate knowledge of the sources of action was necessarily excluded, and spiritual mystery was substituted for philosophic demonstration. The human mind is incapable of forming any conception of that which is not material. Man is a being whose composition is purely physical, and moral properties or intellect are the necessary results of organic concentration. To ascertain, therefore, the foundation of moral principle, it is necessary to revert to the physical constitution of human nature. It is necessary to go to the source of sensation, to the cause of impressions, and the diversity of these impressions, to the universality of fact, that all human nature possesses the same or similar sensations, together with all the other additional circumstances resulting from the subsequent intellectual combinations of our existence. All human beings are susceptible of pain. They are all also susceptible of pleasure. They are all possessed of the same senses, subjected to the same wants, exhibit the same desires, and are satisfied with the same enjoyments. These positions cannot be controverted. They are true in the general features of their character, and the inconsiderable deviations resulting from the variations of animal structure cannot, in any eminent degree, shake the rectitude or universality of these positions. The modification of the principle of animal structure in intelligent existence is no doubt diversified by a nice and inscrutable gradation, but the aggregate amount of organic results must be nearly the same. And though the animal sensation were to vary in a still higher degree, yet it would, nevertheless, be substantially true that certain comprehensive axioms might be laid down, which would necessarily include within the sphere of their imperious effect every possible diversification of the sensitive faculties of human nature. That happiness is to be preferred to misery, pleasure to pain, virtue to vice, truth to falsehood, science to ignorance, order to confusion, universal good to universal evil, are positions which no rational being could possibly controvert. They are positions to which mankind, in all ages and countries, must yield assent. They are positions the truth of which is never denied, the essence of which is never controverted. It is the form and application only which has been the cause of social contention, and not the reality or excellence of the axioms themselves. That universality of the principle of sensation generates universal capacity of enjoying pleasure and suffering pain. This circumstance modifies the character of human actions and renders it necessary that every man should regard every other man with an eye of strict justice, with a tender and delicate sensibility, with a constant reference to the preservation of his feelings and the extension of his happiness. In a word, that the exercise of eternal justice should be constantly reciprocated by all the individuals of the same species. If I assume to myself the pretended right of injuring the sensations, the moral sentiments, or general happiness of my neighbor, he has undoubtedly an equal right to commit the same violence upon me. This would go to the destruction of all right, to the total subversion of all justice. It would reduce society instantly to a state of warfare and introduce the reign of terror and of misery. It is a contradiction in terms to assert that any man has a right to do wrong. The exercise of such a pretended right is the absolute destruction of all right, and the first human being who commits violence has already prepared for himself a hell of retaliation, the justice of which his own mind can never deny. It is, therefore, inconsistent with truth to say that there is no such thing as a general standard of moral principle. This standard has a real existence in the construction of our nature. It is ascertained and regulated by the rule of reciprocal justice. It is absolute in the most important duties of human life, but in other cases of less weight and magnitude, it is discovered by the calculations of judgment, by the process of the understanding, and will sometimes vibrate between the impressions of sense and the subtle combinations which constitute an ultimate moral decision. If it be objected upon the suggestion of this idea that the system of natural morality is less perfect than that which has been revealed, the true answer is that revealed authority in the most intelligible cases is incorrect and absurd, and in the more refined cases of difficulty, a total ignorance is manifested, so that it is evident upon the very face of the record that the subject of moral principle in its subtle discriminations was never examined or understood by theological writers. The boasted maxim of the Christian religion, quote, "All things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them," end quote, is incorrect in point of phraseology, and in point of principle does not exceed any of the moral writers of antiquity, who lived many hundred years before Jesus Christ. If this scriptural declaration means to establish the doctrine of reciprocal justice, it is incontrovertibly right. But the idea of placing the essence of virtue in the wishes of the human heart is not very correct. It is very possible that one human being may desire another to do unto him many things which ought not to be done, and which are in their own nature improper or immoral. To say, therefore, that our desires should constitute the basis of moral decision is a declaration not consistent with truth, and which in many cases would subvert the very essence of moral principle. There is a fitness or suitableness in the thing itself, united with the consideration of the good or bad effect that would be produced, which ought to become the ground of uniform and universal judgment in the human mind. My neighbor may wish me to do unto him an act of serious and substantial injury, which being performed ought to be returned to me in manner and form exactly the same. And thus, by an adherence to this maxim as it is now stated, a double injury would now be produced, and the foundation of virtue shaken to the center. But waiving any criticism of this kind, in giving to this scripture declaration the full extent of what is contended for, it is nevertheless no more than a plain maxim of justice, which had been known and practiced, in a greater or lesser degree, at all times and in all countries. All the local and unjust institutions of mankind in former ages have not destroyed the essential relation which man bears to man, nor have they been able wholly to efface a knowledge of those duties which result from these relations and from the powers and principles of human existence. The more the subject of moral principle is examined, the more it will appear that there are certain general features in it which the experience of man has partially recognized, and being fully developed and reduced to practice would constitute a solid foundation for human felicity. The approach to such a standard of perfection will be gradual and slow, but it must, nevertheless, from the very nature of man, be constant and certain. The following, says Volney, is conceived to be the primordial basis and physical origin of all justice and right. Whatever be the active power, the moving cause that directs the universe, this power having given to all men the same organs, the same sensations, and the same wants, has thereby declared that it has also given them the same right to use of its benefits, and that in the order of nature all men are equal. Secondly, inasmuch as this power has been given to every man the ability of preserving and maintaining his own existence, it clearly follows that all men are constituted independent of each other, and that they are created free, that no man can be subject and no man sovereign, but that all men are the unlimited proprietors of their own persons. Equality, therefore, and liberty are two essential attributes of man, two laws of the divinity, not less essential and immutable than the physical properties of inanimate nature. Again, from the principle that every man is the unlimited master of his own person, it follows that one inseparable condition in every contract and engagement is the free and voluntary consent of all the persons therein bound. Further, because every individual is equal to every other individual, it follows that the balance of receipts and payments in political society ought to be rigorously in equilibrium with each other, so that from the idea of equality immediately follows the other idea, equity and justice. Again, the same author observes that there existed in the order of the universe and in the physical constitution of man eternal and immutable laws which waited only his observance to render him happy. O men of different climes, look to the heavens that give you light, to the earth that nourishes you, since they present to you all the same gifts. Since the power that directs their motions has bestowed on you the same life, the same organs, the same wants, has it not also given you the same right to use of its benefits? Has it not hereby declared you to be all equal and free? What mortal then shall dare refuse to his fellow creature that which is granted him by nature? O nations, let us banish all tyranny and discord. Let us form one society, one vast family, and since mankind are all constituted alike, let there henceforth exist but one law, that of nature, one code, that of reason, one throne, that of justice, one antler, that of union. The foregoing impressive sentiments of this celebrated writer disclose with clearness to the view of the human mind the nature of moral principle and the foundation of all right and of all virtue. It is the reciprocation of sensation, the mutility of condition, of powers and wants that constitute the immortal basis of justice and lead to the establishment of rules whose operation must ever be in strict coincidence with the happiness of the human species. The exceptions to those fundamental principles are so few and so unimportant as to form no strong objection against the general assertion that there exist in the constitution of human nature those essential properties which confer upon man the character of moral agent. To controvert, therefore, the existence of these moral principles, or the idea of a general standard in the morality of human actions, is to fly in the face of all experience, to oppose the universal consciousness of the human understanding and deny the most conspicuous facts connected with the life of man. So that finishes that chapter. It's a pretty hard read, as you can tell, and hopefully maybe you understood some of that with my crazy reading. I'm not typically doing a lot of readings like this on my channel, but if you like this video, feel free to let me know. Give it a like, leave a comment, I don't know. Thank you very much for watching. This is Corey Edmund Engelot. I'm the author of Slavery Gone for Good. Check it out if you haven't already. It goes over these topics, perhaps in an even easier way to understand. But this is from 300 years ago from now when I make this video. So it's just powerful to see that, especially with such great use of words. It's amazing. And if you want to check it out for yourself, again, the book is called Principles of Nature by Elihu Palmer. Feel free to check it out. Thank you very much for watching.